Okay, you're live.
Okay.
You're live now, sir.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome to ICAR meeting on Thursday, January 5th, 2023. Just to remind everyone, we have a 1-hour meeting this morning, and I think we're going to have a fair amount of conversation and discussion around one particular rule. And anyway, I'd like to keep things moving along. Before we get started, I'd like to go around and introduce the members of the committee and staff.
Mark McDonald, I represent most of Orange County in the Senate, serve on the Natural Resources and Finance.
Anthea Dexter-Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Representative Mark Higley from Lowell, and I represent the new Orleans Lamoille District.
Representative Carol Odie from the far new north end of Burlington.
Jenny Lyons, Senator representing Chittenden Southeast.
Representative Seth Bongartz, I represent Bennington 4, which is Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and part of Sunderland, and I'm on the newly configured Environment and Energy Committee.
Senator Chris Bray from Bristol. I'm representing the Addison Senate District, and I'm on natural resources and energy as well as finance.
Representative Trevor Squirrel, and I'm on House Appropriations. I represent Underhill and Jericho. And back here, and ma'am, host is Charlotte.
Charlie Dudo,
And you're
and
Lindsay Schreier, administrative assistant.
all right. Learning on the job. Okay, first order of business is to approve the minutes of December 15th. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Senator Bray has moved to accept the minutes of December 15th. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. First order of business in terms of rules, 22 P06, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets Regulation for Control Pesticides. Mr. Huber, do you have general comments you want to make on the front end here, or should I go to one of the person who wants to give testimony and then we'll?
Sure.
Because you're first on the agenda, and that's why I'm asking the question.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, members of ICAR. My name is David Huber.
Why don't you come to the table, please?
Right here, okay?
Yes, that's fine.
I'll keep it rather quick. Is there any way to save any time for rebuttal at the very end, or
Yeah.
is that appropriate for a third ICAR meeting? I'm just unsure as to the procedure at this point. Okay, very good. Well, good morning, members of ICAR and everyone else in the room today. My name is Dave Huber, Deputy Director of the Public Health and Agricultural Resource Management Division at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. As for general comments, I think I've said quite a lot about the rule over the past month with you guys, and certainly since the rulemaking process has started with the state of Vermont and the Agency of Agriculture, going back to our first ICAR meeting, which was March 14th. Main takeaways here, this rule is not arbitrary. This rule meets the statutory intent. This is improved regulation. It is modernizing the 1991 regulations, and it is incorporating pollinator protection comments from the 2017 Pollinator Protection Committee's report. And as far as a timeline, I just want to make it very clear that there has been ample opportunity for the public to weigh in from both state agencies as well as members of the public and the regulated community. In fact, we had 2 ICAR meetings, March 14th, 2022 and March 29th, 2022. We even delayed our rulemaking, ending up in a procedural back and forth here to make sure that Agency of Natural Resources was adequately heard. We had a public hearing June 15th, 4 hours, and it was published on our website as well as YouTube. It is still up on both our website and YouTube. We responded to comments, and now we're at our third LCAR hearing. I would also like to invite Secretary Tebbets. Secretary Anson Tebbets is Secretary of the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Sure. Take my seat if you like. Sure.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be with you, and congratulations. I was in the State House yesterday, and there was a lot of wonderful energy there. And I know today is another special day, so congratulations to all of you and so forth. I just come before you to ask you to support this rule. 1991 is a long time. This updates it. And I know there's a lot of issues that may be swirling that are not addressed in this rule. I think there's avenues that we can have those discussions, maybe in a different forum, maybe in another rule. My hope is we will not wait another 30 years to come to you folks with updating a rule. This modernizes it, with some aspects that I think, the federal government wants us to come in compliance with that. I think EPA, and Dave, I think I'm correct, EPA is proud of this rule. They endorsed it.
Very much so.
They're looking at it. I think we're one of the few states that's accomplished this. So I think, it's some of the issues that are not in the rule. And I think that may be the biggest rub, some of the things that are not in the rule. We can take a look at those and have some serious conversations with whether it's at the legislature or maybe it's coming back with a new rule that addresses some of the concerns that are out there. So that's my general feeling about this.
Okay. Any questions right now from committee? Okay. What I'd like to do is there are two other individuals, and thank you.
Can I just say?
I'm sorry.
I would have a lot of questions, but then we get into some areas that probably are not the purview of this committee at this point. But I just want to say thank you for coming in this morning. It's early. We appreciate it.
No, thank goodness we didn't have ice, so that was good.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Secretary. We have two other individuals on the agenda here, Ms. Knight and Mr. Overstreet. Ms. Knight wanted to she'd given testimony, I believe, a prior meeting, had some new information that she wanted to share, not old information. And I granted her permission to present that new information and for a few minutes regarding this rule. And Mr. Overstreet is on here, not to provide testimony, but to be available for questions and to the other group that had sent us comments about the rule in terms of their concerns and also suggested items that might be suggested to committees of jurisdiction. So he's here just if we have a question for that group in general and the materials that they've previously submitted. Ms. Knight?
Where would you like me to sit?
Here if you want. You can sit right down here. Oh, right here, that's fine.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Okay. My name is Sylvia Knight, for the record. I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you in person about these regulations. I am testifying today as a member of the Vermont Pesticide and Poisons Action Network. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Some of us were engaged in the process to modify the regulations with little success. We are here with masks as a reminder of the 1 million pounds of toxic pesticides used annually in Vermont. As members of LCAR, you have an important role as a check on regulations that can continue to harm our shared community of life. We are urging you to object to these regulations. We urge you to think of generations to come, to gather your deepest courage to not accept them. The regulations may be a legal framework for using pesticides, but they are inconsistent with and contrary and actually adversarial to the following important legislative efforts that are closely interrelated. They are adversarial to legislative efforts to reduce our contributions to climate chaos because pesticides are made from petroleum. Pesticides are stored in petroleum-based containers, transported using petroleum, applied using petroleum, break down to CO2 and formaldehyde, and they kill important organisms in the soil, rendering the soil unable to absorb or sequester CO2. They are adversarial to legislative intent and efforts since 1970 to reduce pesticide use, now at over 1 million pounds annually since 2013. They are adversarial to legislative intent and efforts to protect human health and ecological health from toxins like PFAS. PFAS are not mentioned in these regulations. They are adversarial to legislative intent and efforts to protect all pollinators responsible for most plant and food growth. We don't have food without pollinators. Regulations promoting pesticides cannot, will not stop the toxic action of thousands of pounds of pesticides which go on harming and killing after they are released into soil, food crops, water, and our bodies. We urge you to please object to these rules. What are we waiting for? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Any questions for? Thank you very much.
Question?
Chair Squirrel. I know I'm not on the agenda, but I would like if I could have a few minutes of your time today to address some of these.
Representative Triano is asking for the opportunity to have a few minutes before the committee. How does the committee feel about that?
I'll be brief.
I move that we,
Okay, please.
Thank you. Thank you, committee, for hearing me today. And I just wanted to be brief. Some of you know that I was the lead sponsor of Act 83, the initial pollinator protection bill that passed through let me remind the committee, it passed every committee, including the money committees, unanimously. It passed out of both houses unanimously, and it was signed by our governor into Act 83. So I'm here at the request of the 7 stakeholders that contacted this committee regarding their objections. And as the lead sponsor of that, I was also one of the lead sponsors on last year's bill to address treated seeds and the availability of treated seeds and whether or not they actually increase crop yield for farmers, because I think we found out that a lot of farmers don't really know because it's the only seeds that are available. So I just wanted to encourage you, our anticipation when I drafted that bill was not that we stayed neutral. It was not that we moved back on these regulations. It is that we move forward and we continue to protect pollinators. And what I hear in the community, not in any public hearing, but on the ground, speaking to my constituents, speaking to the people of Vermont, they know, they understand that without pollinators, we have no food. And it comes back to me in a positive way ever since I sponsored those 2 bills, and every person I speak to about it. People of the citizens of Vermont know that this is a very important issue And I suggest, or I implore you to reconsider the section on pollinators and to take another look, move forward and protect pollinators. They provide our food. And thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative?
Thanks very much for letting me speak. Appreciate it.
Okay, committee. It's our third week having this conversation. And I also want to thank the Agency of Ag for giving us a little bit more time to have this deliberation. Appreciate that. We certainly get into policy conversations in this committee, but we don't make decisions on rulemaking based on policy. We have a certain set of guidelines, the Administrative Procedures Act that we follow to guide our actions in this committee. So, and I've had a little bit of a conversation with some of the folks in the audience here about our role here and acknowledgement of policy concerns, but not a place where they can be addressed. Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, this is a really difficult rulemaking process. Of course, we want to see progress since 1991. There's no question about it. And I look at the public input and then the way the rule was developed, and that is our purview. And so as I'm thinking about that, last time that Deputy Director Huber was here, I asked him about how long that part of Agency of Agriculture was in place, the Public Health and Agriculture Division. And so I want to go back to that and ask, can I ask?
Yeah.
So I don't have to.
Mr. Hoover, you want to come back to the table?
So, and I very much appreciate the perspective and that the Agency of Agriculture is modernizing itself to be cognizant of public health issues. But, and also, so I do have a couple of questions. One, as in the division, do you keep a database of information about the effect of any pesticides or other agricultural applications and their effect on populations?
Effect on
human population.
Human population?
Yeah.
Would you like to come up here as well, Carrie?
The reason I'm asking that is that, and so if you, do you have that type of data? There's a reason I'm asking. Just yes or no, do you keep that type of data?
No. Please, yeah.
So
please introduce yourself.
Carrie Engineer, currently with the Cannabis Control Board, former director of the Public Health and Ag Resource Management Division. And not individually at the agency, we don't keep human health impact data, but when it is reported through the NPIC, the National Pesticide Information Clearinghouse, we get our NPIC data that reports any calls to poison control centers and any calls to NPIC about human health impact. So there is a EPA grant that funds another entity to do that work nationally, and we do get that data. But as far as individual harm registries, like a breast cancer registry, that's managed through the Department of Health and not specific to pesticides.
So given that it is Department of Health that has that data for Vermont, what relationship did you have with the Department of Health during the development of the rules? How consistently were they engaged in informing you about, and my concern from my perspective as Chair of Health and Welfare continues to be on PFAS in particular. We know that that's one of the chemicals involved. So can you talk a little bit about the engagement with Department of Health and how they might have influenced the development of these rules?
Sure. So at both of the ICAR meetings that we held, it was March 14th and March 29th, at those meetings, which is the Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules, delegates from most agencies and departments are there. I believe Brendan Atwood is the Department of Health's delegate. I believe he was there at both of those meetings. Following that, we have the Agricultural Innovation Board, which meets over at the Agency of Agriculture. State toxicologist Sarah Bose is on the board for the Ag Innovation Board. There was a presentation about the rule back, I believe it was either April, I think April 11th, 2022. Following that, there was another presentation to the board. Again, Sarah Bose was in attendance. That was in November and posted to our website. We have made it very clear throughout the process by going through the Administrative Procedures Act, especially the public comment portion of that, that anybody was able to make comments. And throughout the process, we did receive comments from other agencies appropriately through the Administrative Procedures Act, as well as the public comment period.
And so they read the final rules as well and had adequate time to respond to the rules as written?
I think everybody has had adequate time to read the rules as well as to respond, both prior to the public comment period opening June 15th, during the public comment period, as well as post public comment period. I think as this body has shown, we had a December 1st LCAR hearing. At that hearing, the LCAR, the committee, had some concerns about A&R's involvement. And we postponed by 2 weeks to the next LCAR committee so that we would be able to have some input from Agency of Natural Resources.
So, but going back to the Department of Health, and that was something about the A&R, but at our last meeting, I asked about the Department of Health. And I asked you questions about the health implications. Did you go back to the Department of Health and ask them to review the rules with an eye to the influence on people?
No, I did not do that.
Okay, no, thanks. Well, no, I just think it's really important. Our committee spends a lot of time talking about the public health consequences of chemicals that leach out of our consumer products, pesticides being one, or maybe the containers that contain the pesticide. So I just want to make sure that all of the unintended consequences of the rules are considered.
Senator Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think we've talked about not treading as LCAR members into policy discussions, and we're trying to stick to our lane. One of those, the lane, though, I think that we pay a lot of attention to is process. So it's a little troubling to me that we've had more than one time we've heard, I'm not saying this is not correct. I'm just saying we've heard representations that all the sister agencies have been consulted, and yet prior to an earlier LCAR meeting on this, I received a call literally on the way to the State House that Department of Environmental Conservation had concerns. So we had a pause. We asked DEC to lead LCAR and AG a written explanation of their concerns. There was a back and forth. AG responded. The rule was amended. So it seemed, I'm not sure how the process you've walked through very methodically with ICAR, et cetera, has led to sort of an 11th hour call from a sister agency saying we have concerns with it. Now I'm feeling like the very same thing has happened with Department of Health. There was an email yesterday from the division director and state epidemiologist for environmental health expressing concerns about the rule. And so at the very least, I would hope that we would pause and once again ask in this case, Department of Health to formally explain their concerns with the rule and to see a formal response from the Agency of Agriculture, whether that's a further emendation of the rule or at least a written response so we know why you think their concerns do not have merit. Because in terms of protecting the process, I'm feeling like twice over now, we are just about to have a meeting and we learn about concerns. So from my seat, it's hard to say that I have confidence in the process that's led to the rule before us at the moment. So I think, I would like to check in with the chair. I'm looking too at our schedule on the rule. We've already passed the 8-month adoption period. So if we were to request more time in order to ask DOH to make a formal statement and to have a formal response from the Agency of Agriculture, then we're already beyond the 8-month deadline. So I'd like to know what the implications of that are, because if we were forced to vote, then I feel like from a standpoint of prudence, I would have to object to the rule. So I'd like to sort this out.
Mr. Chairman?
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, please.
So the Agency of Agriculture, their 8-month adoption deadline is up in a few days. So is LCAR's 45-day review period. Both have been extended several times. The agency could proceed to adopt the rule if LCAR doesn't do anything today, because it's the 45 days now extended for LCAR to object. If LCAR were to request an extension from the agency and the agency granted it, under LCAR's rules of procedure, there is that sort of proportional increase. So if the agency gave you another 2 weeks, their 8-month deadline would also extend by 2 weeks. Charlene would need to send notice of that to the Secretary of State's office, and we would need to get something in writing from the agency doing that extension. That's what happened back in December to get you to your now sort of parallel January 8th deadlines. In terms of what the APA says about the sister agencies needing to consult with each other and the involvement of ICAR, that is not under Section 820 in the APA one of ICAR's duties. ICAR needs to assist in the review, evaluation, and coordination of programs and activities of state agencies, the development of strategies for maximizing public input, and the promotion of consistent measures among agencies involving the public in the rulemaking process, et cetera. And then it goes on to say that the duties shall also include review of existing and proposed rules of agencies in terms of style, consistency with the law, legislative intent, and the policies of the governor. So it alludes to the fact that there should be coordination, but it does not specifically say you can't clear ICAR without there being agreement from all of the agencies and departments under the executive branch. So I think that's part of why maybe you're getting to a point where you didn't necessarily hear from other departments and agencies. And I'm sure, since I know the secretary is looking to speak, can provide more information on what has actually happened here. But to the extent that you think this is a failure of the process under the APA, one, it's not something that LCAR can object to, and two, it's not something that I think is directly addressed under the responsibilities of ICAR.
Senator McDonald.
For our guests today and anybody's listening online, council has reminded us that we are the checkers of homework. And we look at the administration's homework and we say it passes or it fails. This particular rule, as the secretary has pointed out, hasn't been updated in 30 years. And what we have before us has a host of things in it that are worthwhile, important updates. And we have guests here today who say, yes, it does have important things in it, et cetera, but there are concerns that have yet to be addressed. So as a member of this committee, I'm looking for a way to adopt the measures that have been put before us, but make it very clear that the concerns that have been raised, the health department's participation or lack of participation be addressed, and that at the nearest opportunity, this committee is coming back to address the rest of the homework that has been pointed out by many that has yet to be done. And I'm hoping we can craft a way through that, or council can give us some advice on how to do it, on how citizens can petition to exactly what the process is to petition administration to do further rulemaking as from members of the public who have that right to petition, and perhaps council could tell us what those
Yeah.
how that process works.
Under section 806 of the APA, it provides that a person may submit a written request to an agency asking the agency to adopt, amend, or repeal a procedure or rule. Within 30 days after receiving the request, the agency shall initiate rulemaking proceedings, shall adopt, amend, or repeal the procedure, or shall deny the request giving its reasons in writing. So it could be that it yields a response saying, we're not going to do that, XYZ, here are our reasons. But that is something that individuals have under the APA to try and push a rulemaking that would otherwise not be initiated by the agency.
Thank you. Representative Higley.
Thank you, Chair. I have a little different perspective than some that have spoken in regards to moving this forward. I've the last two times made an initial motion to pass this. I certainly understand concerns from the pollinator community, read through the letters. Now the health department, it seems like, is stepping up. But, I hear from the secretary and the deputy director that they're more than willing to listen to folks and possibly come up with other rules. I know in the past on issues that have come before us, we have had concerns and addressed letters to the committees of jurisdiction to consider those and address those. That's another form of public process. So again, I hope that we can move this along today, and I'm sure that the folks in the audience aren't going to be silent, and I'm sure maybe even other folks in the health department are going to come forward. But to me, this is, I believe, time sensitive, and as the senator just said too, this has been a long time coming. There does appear to be some real concerns, whether it's PFOAs or whatever. But I think they can be addressed and get this initial rule in place.
Thank you, Representative.
I'd
like to give an opportunity for the secretary to respond if there are no other committee questions.
No, I would just say, I don't want to leave the impression that we have not been in constant communication with the health department on this issue. We all get busy. They may have been dealing with a crisis of the day and weren't focused on this rule at the time. But we've had conversations with him over the last few days. I've talked to Dr. Levine over the last few days. He's comfortable with the rule. We do understand that we may be able to do some things. Maybe there could be a MOU between the two agencies that can work on some of these issues that they have concerns about. But I just want to make sure that we don't leave the impression that we've not been communicating and talking with the health department about this rule. We know it's important to them. It's important to us. We know it's important to DEC. We're communicating, we're talking. And I think we can move forward and work with our sister agencies on any concerns or what the public has, and we'll have those, and as you discussed, and maybe in a different policy area.
Senator Bray.
So thank you. I want to be very careful in what I'm saying, in that I'm not doubting in any way that those kinds of communications have been ongoing. And what's troubling from observing the process from the ICAR perspective is that twice over, literally within 24 hours of an ICAR meeting, agencies have brought forward concerns with the rule as currently offered. And the last time we paused, and it seemed like it was profitable, DEC articulated their concerns more concisely in writing for the sake both of the agency as well as ICAR. Agency responded, the rule was amended, and we were ready to go again. Now I feel like we're in a very similar position. So I would, I guess, in order to advance our conversation, I would move that we postpone action for 2 weeks on this rule in order to provide time for the Vermont Department of Health to articulate its concerns formally, both to LCAR and the Agency of Agriculture, and the Agency of Agriculture to either respond in writing why they think, why those concerns have or do not have merit. And if there are some that have merit, to perhaps offer a further amendment to the rule so that we have, I'd say, sort of finished our homework by the time we next convene on this rule.
Secretary.
And I think this is where this process is complicated. My understanding is their concerns would have to be done through the statute. So we could go back and have that conversation with them, and we could come back and then we would say that their concerns would have to be done through statute, and we couldn't address it in the rule anyway. So I think that's kind of the part we're all grasping here is we're trying to deal with some bigger issues that aren't really relevant. We can't address it. I think the senator from Orange addressed that. So I think that's where we're at on that. So we're all about getting to a better place. That's what we're about, and communicating, whatever. So if we can work through some of those in another forum, we can have those conversations.
If I may. Redoing this rule 30 years in the making. And I appreciate that maybe some of the concerns that the Department of Health have are statutory. That's your perspective. Okay, appreciate that. Taking another 2 weeks, although it seems like I understand that we've been pumping it along, appreciate that, okay? Given that we're talking about a 30-year redo of a rule, it's very small, very minuscule. And for this committee to have the opportunity to at least see that dialogue and that conversation and discussion back and forth, I think would be useful. And you speak to getting to that better outcome. So maybe 2 weeks is that better outcome, my perspective. Senator McDonald.
Would there be, one of the most inspiring suggestions was that there be an MOU between the parties who might take the next step in that everyone here thinks is worth taking. And could we get, if we knew what that might be, it would help us, give us some.
So you'd come back with the MOU to present to you in 2 weeks, or just you asking me whether we could do an MOU now? I'm sure we've already discussed an MOU with them already, so.
Given those two choices, you would recommend come back in 2 weeks? Secretary, would you recommend we bring us one, process?
Senator Lyons.
Yeah, I'd like to interject because my comment earlier was going to be about that. An MOU is a pretty significant thing. You're talking about an MOU between Ag and Department of Health. You already have an MOU between Ag and for stormwater purposes, for water quality monitoring. And that took a great deal of time in legislative committee. We talked about the parameters for that and what would be included. So I don't see this MOU as something that could be fleshed out in 2 weeks. And it is a policy issue. So from that perspective, Senator, I would say, and Secretary, Mr. Secretary, I would say that's something that committees can certainly engage in discussion about. The 2 weeks, I think, is critically important because it does allow for the Department of Health and the Agency of Agriculture to engage in a conversation that may bring us some changes to the rule. That would be helpful. Because right now, there are significant questions that come from the pollinator side of life, the health of our little honeybees, and the health of people. So, and yes, some of that is policy, but some of it may well be addressed within the rules. So I think the 2 week period is an important one. We did that for DEC, as Senator Bray said. And I think it's time to just, is anybody spreading pesticides right now?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, I think we need to do it right. Let's wait for 2 weeks and do it right.
Well, we waited 31 years, we can wait 2 weeks, right? So,
Yeah, and that's the point. We want something to happen. We
in the scope of things, so.
Senator Bryce.
So I made a motion to postpone action for 2 weeks. I just want to make sure that we're not going over any sort of tripwire where the rule will just be adopted and put into place because we have missed an opportunity to object. So can you clarify that for me?
I think you want to move to postpone and request a 2-week extension on the 45-day review period from the secretary who is sitting here.
I would like to amend my motion to precisely that. Thank you. The other
Any more?
piece of it is I hope that, well, okay, I'll wait.
Is the agency amenable?
I got to check all the rules. I'm not familiar with it, and this is where the lawyers get involved, but you know, we did it last time, so I'm just, if I can just reserve the right to, if there's something really crazy and just in the rule. I'm not saying I'm not just one of those, it's one of those lawyer things. I want to make sure
So that's a yes with an asterisk.
well, I guess so.
All right, any other discussion, committee member?
I just have one question. It's not directly related to what we've been talking about, but I've never really heard, and I'd like to hear a real explanation for why, with regard to pollinators, you included only, if I understand it correctly, sort of commercial honeybees and not monitoring for the impacts on native bees. What was the rationale for that?
I can answer this, but also we have Steve Dwight in the room who designed some of the language around why that decision happened nationally. And some of that language is the wild pollinators can't be measured. And with what's the measure, yeah, no, the rule about measuring, not having objectives that you can't measure.
Oh.
That was one of the state's objectives, and I can't remember what the name of that program is. But in terms of wild pollinator health, there's no measure. There's nothing we could measure success against or toward.
But that's a national decision?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I don't want to, I know we're
Yeah.
limited for time. I don't want to beat this horse, but don't we know that we have impacts on that? We have a reduction in the amount of native bees in Vermont and some sense of why? Because I've read stories to the effect that we know we're losing populations.
Yep. So Vermont is one of the few states that has a historical pollinator record because of some of the work done by entomologists at UVM. And those numbers are changing. They're changing. Some are going up, some are going down. We worked with the folks, brought that information to the Pollinator Protection Committee, and it's why they included some measures to protect wild pollinators in that report. But in terms of a regulatory document that needs to measure success, we couldn't count on those archives to continue, and in fact, they're not. There's an effort to protect those collections that is currently failing. So the resource to measure wild pollinators doesn't really exist anymore.
Okay, that's enough for now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? We have a motion. Okay, we'll ask for a vote. All those in favor of Senator Bray's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just follow up? I mean, in order for us to assure that the 2 week are used productively I'm wondering if LCAR can, of course, reach out to both Department of Health and ask them to formally submit their concerns both to LCAR and the agency, and then to ask for a formal response from the agency, whether it's an amended rule, comments in response to the DOH memo, or a combination of the two.
And there, you could probably do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some, because I don't want to get it the night before either. if we could put some, I realize there's 2 weeks is a short amount of time, but it'd be nice to get it at least a couple days before whatever I have to read it.
The Tuesday before the Thursday meeting at the latest kind of thing.
That would
Okay.
better than Wednesday night.
And Thea, I guess you'll be in touch with the Agency of Ag on.
Yeah, I think I'll reach out
Okay,
to
great.
Mike and maybe Keith to figure out who at the Department of Health this should go to, and I'll work on a letter.
All right, great.
And we'll try and get it out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Even though I'm sure the internet is now hearing that you want this.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. Senator Lyons.
Yeah, just, at some point, we start talking about sending letters to committees of jurisdiction. I don't think we're quite ready for that. And because I do think there will be discussion in committees of jurisdiction, and it will go beyond, it'll be agriculture, it'll be natural resources, it'll be health and health and human services in the House. Those committees are already engaged in conversations about various chemical pollutants, and there might be something that those committees are working on. So,
Yeah.
I think this is such an important topic, and no one wants to, we all are so supportive of our agricultural community, but without, if we see pollutants, then we won't survive. And if we see pollutants, we won't have pollination and we won't survive. So, I mean, the combination here, it's a really public health and environmental set of issues, and I think it's important that we address it as much as possible. And I'm hopeful that some of our committees will be diving into this a little bit carefully, without harming a very important industry to the state, or two sets of industries to the state, three sets of it. I can think of them all. They keep coming through. So, yeah.
I think in 2 weeks, when we get back together, we'll also take up those points, and hopefully we'll have even more clarity to what we were suggesting to those committees of jurisdiction. Senator McDonald.
I want to appreciate the remarks from Chip Triano, who, if you were looking for an image of bees buzzing about around pesticides, he served a year crew member on helicopter in Vietnam when Agent Orange was being sprayed about. And he's a lucky bee because he's here.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to see if we can't move on to the next item on the agenda. We're getting tight for time, unfortunately. And I'm going to defer to Senator Lyons whether she feels she has enough time to have this conversation and involve the committee. We're talking about 7 minutes.
We can start.
I will point out that we're still talking about an emergency rule that's in place.
Right, and
There's no timing issues.
it ends on January 24th, the emergency rule.
Thank you, members.
No, it's March something.
No, it's the end of March.
It's the end of March?
Thank you. Okay.
The 120-day for us expires on it.
So an emergency rule can remain in effect for 180 days, and DCF will probably get the dates right. I believe they adopted it on September 28th. So 180 days, let's just call that March 28th.
Okay. All right.
I see someone.
I'm reading old information then. Yes, I think, I'm trying to remember when we had a last update where House Human Services and Senate Health and Welfare met together with interested parties to talk about the implications of this rule from a policy perspective. And we had identified, as chairs of committees had identified, that the October 1st date to cut off applications for the transitional housing rule was contrary to legislative intent. And then as a result of the meeting that we had as a joint meeting, we asked the department, and I think members of the department are here. They've done a great deal of work on this, and I know that Heidi and Nicole are still working on transitional housing and the seasonal housing policy that came into play after October 1st. nevertheless, just look, and so people are being cared for. But if we look at that October 1st date, which says no more applications for transitional housing, and then look at the data that was made available to us by the United Way, we see that we're nearly, I'm trying to remember the number, but it was very high. It was either 700 or 900 people who were denied application. So those people denied application to the program. Yes, some of them may well be eligible for the seasonal housing, but some of them would not be or wouldn't have taken advantage of it for whatever reason. So the rule is still inconsistent with legislative intent. That hasn't changed. We asked the department to please come back, DCF to please come back with a recommendation, maybe to change the emergency rule. And because it's an emergency rule, I think that was, I don't know motivation for not doing that. Am I being clear?
Yes.
Okay.
To me.
Well, I make sure because there's a lot there and I can't remember when we last talked about this, but so we had the meeting, we heard from folks, we received information about people who could not apply. The October 1st deadline said you can't apply. That was not legislative intent. And so that at least is a very significant part of this rule. And the reason that I would recommend that we not approve the rule.
I will just add one comment to Senator Lyons' narrative. The Joint Fiscal Committee also met around the beginning of December. On a prior Joint Fiscal Committee meeting, there was a presentation around this housing issue, and Joint Fiscal Committee asked DCF to come back with a comprehensive plan for how they were going to deal with this housing challenge going forward. The legislature had added $15 million to housing last year in the conference committee to assist with any shortfall that may occur. Obviously, it was a bigger shortfall than what we anticipated. And when they came back to the Joint Fiscal Committee meeting in December 15, they gave a plan on how to spend the $15 million, which for the most part, I think JFC members were okay with. But it really wasn't an integrated, comprehensive plan. It was just, we're going to spend this money this way. And the way I would characterize the responses of the members of the JFC committee is they were not satisfied with that response. So I just wanted to add that to your.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? There's a motion on the floor. You had a motion?
Yeah, that's a motion.
Okay.
So
Not to,
the motion is not to approve?
not to approve.
Okay, so is the motion to, so an emergency rule is a little different because there's not that required object. And then there's the 2 weeks for the agency to respond and then the second vote to certify the objection. You could object to the rule now and have that be a certified objection. There is precedent in the past where ICAR has said, we're objecting, we think, can you respond? And then taken it up at a subsequent meeting to determine whether or not there actually would be that certified objection.
I'd like to do that. I would like to give DCF the opportunity to respond.
Okay, so.
Yeah, because once we vote to not to accept the rules, that's significant. And it's significant in terms of the state's risk. And I'd rather let that risk stay quiet for a while.
Senator McDonald.
Would it also be correct that a new emergency rule could be implemented at any time and preempt this, and solve the problem, and make our objection moot were they to come up with a new emergency rule that solves the problem?
So if DCF wanted to, it could not unilaterally change the emergency rule. It is already in effect. But if DCF proposed a modification, like striking that October 1st cutoff date, ICAR could approve the rule with that modification, which would change the emergency rule for the balance of the time that it's in effect, which is a couple months.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So how does this work? Is this actually kind of like a preliminary objection?
So
I think that's exactly. And there are two ways to do that based on what council is saying, right? Because of emergency rule, we could object and certify at the same time, essentially.
Okay.
We can object and give them time to respond.
So I'm going to phrase this in a letter that will go to DCF saying that LCAR indicated that it is inclined to certify an objection to the emergency rule and I think you would want to give them 2 weeks to respond at its meeting on January 19th and requests a formal response from DCF in advance of that meeting. And I will write a letter that will go out saying as such.
Committee ready? Yes. All those in favor of the motion from Senator Lyons, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. The next meeting, we will not have a meeting next week. Okay, we'll take off next week. We have a wetlands rule. We had two rules that were going to. Thank you, folks. Sorry. Appreciate it. And there was another rule that's been an agency. I forget what the rule was, but it's being.
Disabilities.
February.
Yeah, disabilities.
Yeah, that's going to be.
I'm glad I have a week off to really read it. So that's good.
Yeah, so they're putting that off to February anyway. So if we go 2 weeks.
Oh, good.
We'll do the wetland rule.
Oh, good.
And we'll also be dealing with the pesticide.
We'll hand this one.
Yeah.
Very good.
2 weeks, okay? So nothing next week.
Okay, so the disability services, developmental services rule, that is being postponed until February?
Johnny?
Yes,
Okay, and did we get a
he's going to send me a 45-day.
extension?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so then at your next meeting, you will do, which will be in 2 weeks on the 19th, finish pesticides, potentially, finish transitional housing, potentially, and take up for the first time the wetlands rule.
Yeah, and I think the wetlands rule is pretty straightforward. That's my understanding. I haven't really delved into it, but yeah, okay.
And that one, the 45-day review period is up on the 27th. So even if you didn't finish it at your 19th meeting, you could take the 26th meeting.
Okay, given the time here, I know there were a couple things on the agenda, but I don't think they're major.
The letter.
Yeah, the letter on the HPE rule and then your in session schedule, which I think you
Oh,
probably
the
could
Katie
approve pretty
Beckett
quickly.
rule.
Yeah, the
We
Katie
okay
Beckett
putting it
rule.
off until next meeting?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah?
the committee won't get to that probably.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess we're done for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done.
Appreciate it. Your motion?
I will
Don't need a
note that you
motion.
adjourned at 1:04.
Right, I'll make the motion if it's needed, but I guess we haven't been doing it.
Joe would be happy if.